Hey guys, I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my April wrap-up. So in the month of April, I read 16 total books, 4 of which were rereads, and then I had an average rating of a 3.78, which I think is a little lower than March, but still like overall not too bad. Definitely had a lot of 4 stars, and I just had a couple 2 stars dragging it down, and I didn't have a single 5 star that was not a reread, so that didn't help. Yeah, so unfortunately, I guess no new favorites discovered last month, which was kind of a bummer, but I did still like most of what I read, so not a total loss there. So I'm just going to talk about these in the order that I read them. So first off was my first reread, and that was Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan. This is, again, my continuing reread of the first 7 Wheel of Time books, so I can finish the series. And looking back at my Goodreads from when I originally read this, like 9 years ago, something like that, I gave it a 3, which was the lowest I gave any of these books on my first read. And I wrote no review of any kind or link, and I don't know why I gave this a 3-star the first time. Like, this was definitely not like the worst of the ones I read so far. Like, I don't know, this was like on par with the others for me. So I'm really curious it passed out. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I thought there were some interesting plot threads that happened in this one that I did not remember. That was the thing. This one too, I did not remember any of the events going. Like, I started this book and I was like, I cannot remember anything that happened in this book. And some things like felt familiar. I was like, okay, as they happened, I was like, that's right. But most of it, I was like, this is kind of just all new. And so there were definitely some interesting plot things that were happening. I did. I was a little sad because there was one of my favorite characters really doesn't show up in this book, and I kind of miss them. I kind of want them to come back. And then my favorite character from book 5. So I ended book 5 with Avienda as my favorite character, and I just liked her less in this book. I don't hate her; she's still a favorite. She's not, I guess it'll depend on how she keeps going to see whether book 5 was like the anomaly for her character or if this book is the anomaly for her character. But I definitely liked her less in this one, which is a little bit of a bummer. But yeah, definitely overall, definitely really intriguing throughout, lots of interesting things, and it ends in a banger of a climax at the end of this one. So one more book down in my reread journey. Next, I read Daring and the Duke by Sarah MacLean. This was the last book in the Bare Knuckle Bastards series, of which the first 2 I read in March, and this was my least favorite of those, and I gave this a 3-star. This one, I was a little skeptical going in because the hero, Ian, was someone who had been painted in a very poor light in the first 2 books, and I was really intrigued as to how she was going to turn it and make him into a romance hero, and I just don't think she totally nailed it. Not totally. There was a little bit of redemption there, but not entirely. I really liked the beginning of this book, and I liked the way this book ended, but the middle, where Ian and Grace just were going back and forth as like they were like, will they, won't they get back together kind of thing, because this was like a second chance childhood lovers, and then they like stopped talking for years and years, and now they're kind of back for each other, and their just back and forth got really repetitive, and I just don't feel like some of the things that took Ian down a notch from previous books really got addressed enough. That kind of got glossed over, and I'm not usually like a huge there must be so much groveling kind of person, but this one there definitely needed to be a little bit more. Okay, next I read The Forbidden Wish by Jessica Khoury. This is a fun, just like YA kind of romantic fantasy standalone that is a retelling of Aladdin, and it ends up being more of a love story between the female genie and then Aladdin. And I thought this was really fun. This was not a necessarily super memorable book, but it was one that I had a really good time reading at the time. Aladdin is my favorite Disney movie, so I picked it up purely on the fact that it was an Aladdin retelling. And yeah, I think as a retelling, it did a good job. It hit kind of the plot beats you would expect it to, and then the author also did a good job injecting some extra backstory and some extra world building into the world of the genie. And I thought that it was really well done, and it really just rounded the story out more, and she executed a few little twists in there from the original. So overall, really fun. Had a really good time as I'm reading it, but it's just not necessarily one that's going to be super memorable from here on out. Next was another reread, and that was Unholy by Neal Shusterman. This is the second book in the Unwind, what's the word for a 4-book series? Quadrology? I'm not sure. The Unwind series, which this says trilogy on it. Like, I got this book back when it first came out, and there's definitely a 4th book because that's the one I didn't read originally. So yeah, so this is a reread again on my quest to finish series. I'm rereading the first 3 books in the series. Have not read the 4th, and this one was just as fun as a reread as the first one. I'm really glad to see that the series holds up because it stuck in my mind as like an ultra favorite from high school. And yeah, These are just really, really gripping, fast-paced reads. This one we expand our world a little bit, both with just where the plot goes. We really start seeing other parts of, like, it really expands some of what the characters are doing and some of who they meet. We also get some new point of views, and I think it just does a really good job with that as kind of the second book and starting to get you intrigued past just what was happening in the first book. And yeah, I'm definitely excited to pick up the third one for my reread. And then next I read The Memory of Souls by Jenn Lyons. This is the third book in the Chorus of Dragons series, and I do think this is my least favorite of the three so far, just because this is the first one of the series where the kind of convoluted, time-jumpy, wibbly-wobbly way in which she tells the stories became a little bit of a detriment in the middle. There was about a 100-page span of this book right in the middle where we had some new characters all pop up all of a sudden with some new points of views and a new timeline where I was just like, now. Like if I had like a scale of like enjoyment and confusion, we're sitting here for like a lot of these books, and in that part it's kind of tipped it a little bit. But that being said, she did bring it all together in the end. It's had a banging 5-star of an ending. So overall, I did still enjoy this. This is a 4-star book still overall, because given how long it is, like the 100 pages in the middle is like a fifth of the book. So not most of it, but definitely a little bit of a slog middle because of that. Yeah, I'm really enjoying these characters. I'm enjoying seeing the relationships with each other grow. I'm enjoying seeing how we're pulling in all these other characters, and it's kind of becoming this huge ensemble thing. And I'm honestly really excited for the fourth one from what I've heard of it. And yeah, definitely been enjoying my time with the series and excited that now the fifth book's out, I can finally read the fourth and then finish the series. Okay, so the next thing I read was A Lesson Inventions by Victoria Lee. This is a young adult dark academia book, and I thought this was a fun book. I thought this was going to be a fantasy book when I picked it up, but it's not. Not fantasy, it's just more like a mystery, dark academia. That was kind of the one quibble I had, was they talked a lot about witchiness in this book, but they never really did any witchiness, and I wish they had. And so this follows Felicity, a student at Dalloway School, who is back after kind of a leave of absence after a tragic accident occurred, and so she kind of left for a while. Now she's back, and she ends up rooming with this new student who's this accomplished author who's 17. She's like a teenage wonderkin author, and they kind of get embroiled in like this research into the Dalloway Five, which is like these 5 girls from when the school was just started who were questionably witches. And yeah, again, I think it's really nailed the dark academia vibes that I would expect when picking it up. The dark, brooding boarding school 100% nailed that. Just wish there was a little bit more witchiness, and I didn't really like the ending we got in the epilogue. So kind of ended on a little bit of a bummer epilogue, because I just like didn't like what it did at the end there. But overall, still definitely enjoyed the book and gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This is an adult contemporary romance following 2 characters who work at the Seattle news station. Our heroine, Ari, works as the weather girl, and our hero, Russell, works in the sports news department, and they decide to set their bosses back up. So their bosses used to be married, and now they're divorced, and they fight all the time, and it's creating kind of a hostile work environment. And so they decide to set them up both for the good of the office, and also Ari really wants to have more of like a mentor-mentee relationship with her boss, because she's kind of like a local weather meteorological legend, and so she kind of wants to get more of a mentorship relationship, but she doesn't really have time to be a mentor when she's fighting with her ex-husband all the time. So in the process of them setting them up, they start to get to know each other better, and I really liked that trope setup. I thought it was fun. I kind of liked the scheming, and I thought it was balanced well with how much time was spent on this side plot as opposed to the main romance. Also, both of our characters are cinnamon rolls, and I don't think I've read a romance book where we've had both characters be cinnamon roll characters, and it was so sweet. I loved it. I loved them together. They were just so cute together. This book also features children, so if you're not into children in your romance books, Ari has a 5-year-old twin niece and nephew that she interacts with a few times throughout the book, but then Russell, our hero, is a dad to a 12-year-old, and so I thought the 12-year-old was kind of a fun new character in this, but I know some people just don't like children all in the romance books, so just warning for that. In addition to the romance, this book also talks about depression, as Ari has depression, and I really liked the kind of character journey that the author takes us on with her journey with that. The one thing I didn't like was I had really weirdly mixed feelings on how the conflict was handled. The nature of the conflict was kind of what I expected to be, just based on some things that had been said earlier kind of some of Ari's insecurities. So I was like, okay, this is going to end up being what the conflict's about. And it was. And that was fine. But then there was like a secondary level to the conflict where I just felt like she was making a big deal out of this thing she found out that just didn't feel like it should have been like a big deal, I guess. Like, I just didn't get why it was a problem. Like, it was kind of a surprise, and I understand being like, oh, like, taken aback maybe, but like, I just didn't understand why she found it to be a barrier in the relationship. And so I just like was annoyed by that. But overall, definitely a really fun read. I give it 4 stars. Next, I read Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. This is a historical fiction novel based on the events of the Tennessee Children's Home, which is a real home in the like 30s to 50s, I think it was, in Tennessee. That was this lady who ended up pretty much stealing babies off of poor people and selling them to adopt to rich people who didn't realize, who were told that these were like actual normal orphans, not like nefariously acquired orphans. And so I thought this was, like, subject-wise, this was a really fascinating historical novel because I had never heard of Tennessee Children's Home, and I thought the story of, like, kind of what was happening there was really fascinating in kind of a horrifying way. Structurally, the book itself really just followed kind of your standard to present day and historical dual point of view historical novel, where in the present day, someone's kind of tracking down the secret. You know, there's someone who thinks it's silly that she's spending all this time on this, and the secret has to do with whatever the past story that it's telling. So that whole structure was just very, it follows the formula of a lot of historical books I've read before, which if you're into that formula, you should read this. If not, don't read this. And yeah, I enjoy those every so often. And I think it was really the subject matter that made this one really good, and I gave this one. Next, I read The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. This is a mystery thriller set in Paris. Our main character is going to stay with her half-brother in his apartment. She needs to leave London, just kind of get out and go somewhere new, kind of start over kind of deal. And when she gets there, he is gone, and she's trying to figure out what happened to him. And as she gets to know the neighbors in his little apartment complex, and what they may or may not have to do with his disappearance. And I thought this was a gripping read. I read it pretty quickly. It had a good balance of leaving clues where I was able to piece together some things, but still leaving things where I didn't figure out. So I still had that feeling of being like shocked, which is, as I've said, pretty much every mystery thriller I read. That's what I love, is being able to figure out a few things, but still being shocked by some revelations. And I think the revelations that I was shocked by were like not just like pulled out of her ass or anything. I did think the main character was a little insufferable, but I often find that in thrillers or mystery books. I don't often mind that in this kind of story, so that didn't really bother me. But yeah, overall, a solid 4-star mystery thriller. Next, I read Starless by Jacqueline Carey, and this was the one book this month that I wish I had DNF'd because I did not like it. I did not DNF it because I was reading it as my monthly book club read that I do with my best friend, and I felt bad DNFing it since there's only 2 of us, and I'm like, if one of us doesn't finish it, how much can we really talk about it? So I pushed through, but this is a standalone adult fantasy following Kai, who is kind of chosen from birth to be the protector of the princess that was, I think they were born on the same day, and this book is split into 3 parts. In the first part, Kai is trained in the desert in this like brotherhood, like monk monastery warrior brotherhood kind of organization. And in the second third, Kai goes to the city and meets Zaria, the princess that they're destined to protect for the first time, and there's some kind of court politics. And then the third part is them going off on this adventure. And each part got worse from the first one. The first one I liked. I liked the first part. I liked the kind of training school. My favorite character in the book was one of the brothers in the first part. They were great. Unfortunately, that character did not show up again as we moved locations. And then once we moved out of that, I think this book would have benefited from multiple point of views, because when we got to court, stuff started happening to the different like royal family members, but like we didn't know who they were or have any time to really care about them before stuff started happening, because we had never seen or heard of them, because Kai had been in the desert and never met any of them. So I was like, why do I care what's happening? I didn't really enjoy the kind of court politics happening. Also, Zaria, the princess that Kai is sent to protect, I just didn't like as a character. She came off very prissy princess type shallow character, and I just like was not into that. She was disabled, and I think the author did a good job with that portion of her character, showing the disabled, but it felt like she compensated too much on her being like, well, she has this disability, so we're gonna make her super and have no other struggles in her personality or something. Like, it was weird. Um, the author also came dangerously close to fixing the disability with magic, but we didn't do that, so I was really nervous for a second, like, they're going to do that? She did not. In addition, Kai and Zaria have this relationship that was platonic for most of the book, and I was down with it to be platonic, but kind of towards when they had first met, because it was like the chosen from birth destiny to protect Zaria, they had this like instant magically induced connection when they first met. Like all of a sudden they like put eyes on each other for the first time and were like completely trusting, totally close, like that. And unfortunately that means we never actually saw any relationship development between them, platonic or otherwise, so I never really bought the relationship. And then in the beginning of the relationship, one of them kissed the other and like hinted they wanted to have romantic, and I was like, there's like not enough development here. But then they didn't pursue that for like the rest of the book. I was like, okay. And at the end, they like got together romantically, and I was like, where the heck did that come from? So I didn't enjoy their relationship. And then the last third was them kind of prophecy hunting adventure, but it was so short, like such a short part of the book, that they were hitting all these verses of the prophecy. Like they were like, it was like they were going on like a scavenger hunt checklist where they're like, oh, we can check off this line of the prophecy. And they were with this crew of people that, once again, we only met in that third. So I had like no attachment to this crew because we just like never got to know them. And I just like didn't enjoy the very checklisty nature of the last third, where they were just like checking off each line of prophecy. That was it. So yeah, this was a miss for me. Yeah, not a big fan. I am surprised with how poorly done I thought the romance and the court politics were in this book, given everything I've heard about the Kushiel's Dart series, which, from what I understand, is a heavily romantic and heavy court politics series that I've heard really great things about. So I'm intrigued at the disconnect between hearing that and what I read in here. So yeah. Next I finished my last reread of the month. No, not my last, second to last reread of the month, with The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I was reading this initially as preparation to be part of Yolene's live show talking about it, but I unfortunately was not able to join the live show. Kind of some scheduling conflicts came up at the last minute, but I did still finish the reread in April. And yeah, I just really love this book. This was the first Brandon Sanderson I read, probably back 10 years ago at least, and this is the fourth time I've read it, and I just love it. Like, I don't even know how to like talk about what I like about it, because I just kind of like all of it. And I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've probably heard lots and lots of opinions of The Way of Kings. But yeah, it was interesting to read. This was the first time I reread it since having read Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, and it was definitely really interesting to kind of go back again, having read those last two, and what happens in those, and like where the characters end up, especially since my favorite character from when I first read this book to when I had read Rhythm of War changes. So it's definitely interesting to see that favorite character and what they're like back in this first one when I didn't love them as much or anything. So yeah, it was just a fun experience, and I'm definitely looking forward to rereading Words of Radiance to then hopefully be able to join the live show for that one. Next, I read The Emma Project by Sonali Dev. This was an arc I had, and unfortunately it was my other 2-star of the month. This was the fourth book in the Rajas series by Sonali Dev, which is a series of Jane Austen retellings. And I think I just had, I don't know, like too high of expectation for this one maybe. I had kind of mixed feelings on some of the others. Like I had roller coaster feelings on the first 3, 4 stars to 3 stars to 5 stars. And so I think coming off the 5-star one into this one, especially since this one is an Emma retelling, which of the 4 Jane Austen retellings, like if you just pitched to me the books with nothing other than which book it was retelling, the Emma retelling is the one I'd probably go to. And I just like didn't like it very much. I spent the majority, so from a retelling standpoint, this was a gender event retelling, and I felt like it was a pretty loose retelling as well. It didn't kind of hit those beats I've been used to seeing in Emma retellings, and full disclosure, I still have not read Emma, so take that with a grain of salt. But beyond that, even just as the book itself, if we take the retelling aspect out of it, I just spent the majority of the book annoyed. And that's just like not the prevalent feeling you want when you're reading a romance book, is annoyance. But I was like annoyed at one or both of the main characters most of the book. Sometimes to switch which one I was annoyed at, and it was annoying. And yeah, so part of it was the heroine had kind of been sort of a villain in book 3, a low level villain though. And so I understood why the hero's family was kind of a little antagonistic towards her after some things that happened in book 3. at the beginning, but the way they were just so nasty to her for so much of the book just like was too much. And then when they finally like owned up and was like, we're sorry, it was like not even really, they didn't even really apologize, and I felt like she deserved an apology for how much they iced her out, especially because of all of her good history with the family. So I didn't like that. I also, while I thought the main characters had really good sexual chemistry, I never really felt like they had romantic chemistry. They started off disliking each other, both through some preconceived notions of each other that aren't entirely correct, as well as just a bad situation with their work that ends up putting them in forced proximity with each other. And as they like hung out and interacted more through the book, I definitely felt the sexual chemistry, but I kept waiting for them to like soften towards each other, and like we hit a point where like, okay, they must be like softening towards each other and not think this opinion anymore, and then like something would happen and they'd say something, be like, no, they still feel just as strongly about that first impression. We're pretty far into the book, like we need to have some changing opinions for me to buy the romance, and they just never really did. They just kind of all of a sudden were in love with each other, and I was just like, so yeah, I didn't love that. Also, there was like the villain character in this book was the heroine's boss, or I guess the heroine's investor in her philanthropic business, and he deserved a big telling off. And we got to the point of the book where he was gonna get the telling off. She was gonna just like hand his ass to him, and she faded to black. Oh, in that scene, I was so mad. I was like, are you kidding me? Of all the places to fade to black, you're gonna deprive me of this scene? We got like a one sentence later, like, and she told him off. And I was like, that was the least satisfying thing I've ever read, was that one. But yeah, unfortunately a bummer, because this was the last book in the series, which, oh, the last thing I didn't like about it, there was this weird secondary romance that was very shoehorned in, because it took up like maybe 3 total chapters of the entire book. It felt very much like she decided to write only 4 books, and at some point in those she was like, wait, but I really want to tell this 5th love story. I'll just like shove it in the last book. And it just didn't work. It was so little time devoted to it that I didn't care about it. It also involved a character that I hadn't really liked in the book. She was kind of a secondary character, and I never really liked her very much. She was just kind of like fine. And it was so jarring when we'd get to one of those chapters, because there were so few that they were so far apart that it'd be like, oh, you again. I kind of forgot about you. So, not a hit for me. Next, I read The Kingmaker by Kennedy Ryan. This is an adult contemporary romance, and it kind of takes place in 3 timelines. We have the first one, which is just a few chapters where our 2 characters originally meet at a protest. The guy is with his dad, who's the CEO of this big oil company, and the girl is a high schooler who has skipped school to protest the oil company. And so they meet initially because the guy ends up joining the protest, and they both get arrested. And so they meet, but she's in high school, so like, he's like, can't do anything here because she's in high school. So like, that was a little bit of a weird way to start the book off. I was like, okay, sure. But then they jump forward 5 or 6 years, I think, because now she's in college and he's out of college, and they meet again and have this one like week together in Amsterdam where they hang out and sleep together a ton, and it's kind of like this reconnection. But they say it won't be going anywhere because he's about to go to Antarctica for several months on some kind of like sciencey climate change study thing. And then at the end of that 4 years, a secret gets revealed and they have a fight, and kind of on bad terms. And then we skipped 10 years later and they meet again because she gets hired to run his brother's presidential campaign. And so it's kind of like a 2nd/3rd chance romance. Which is definitely an interesting setup. I had not read this kind of followed a little bit of different plot beats that I'm used to, because this is an indie published book, and I don't usually ever read indie published romance. I just usually stick to traditionally published for any real good reason other than I don't have a Kindle and KU, and that's, I feel like, tends to be where most people read. They're indie published, and so my library just mostly has traditional. But anyways, because the conflict was a lot earlier in this book than I'm used to, and I kind of liked it. It was like an interesting spin on kind of the beats I've been used to. And I think it ended up working out well. I was kind of concerned when the conflict was so early that the second half of the book would kind of just lose steam for me, but it didn't. So I think Kennedy Ryan did a good job keeping it fast-paced and hooked all the way to the end. And I enjoyed it. It definitely read a little bit differently than I'm used to. I think just the indie romance style is just kind of different from trad published, but I thought it was good. I did think the romance was a tad underdeveloped, but still overall liked it. I read it in a day, so I was definitely very hooked into it. Would definitely read this author again. This book does have a sequel because this book did end on a cliffhanger. However, the couple got together before the cliffhanger. So I'm satisfied. Like, I could have just not read the last chapter and had a complete book. I think if the cliffhanger had been before they had ultimately reunited, I would be sucked into reading the second book. But since it's not, I just don't usually read multiple books following the same couple in just pure romance. Like, same couple over multiple books in a fantasy series, sure, but romance, I'm like, they're back together, we're satisfied. So I definitely read other things this author has put out. I just probably wouldn't read the sequel to this one just because I feel satisfied with the ending of this one, if we're being honest. Next, I read Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and I really enjoyed it. I did not like it quite as much as Black Sun. Black Sun was like an easy 5-star, and this was a really solid 4-star for me instead. I think this one, I understand why some people I think are kind of disappointed in this, but I kind of got out of it what I was expecting. The first book ends in a climax, and so all the following action that you usually might have in that book, and like after book climaxes, is just this book following up the end of the first book, and that's just kind of what I expected out of it. I kind of expected it to be the resolution of that climax and then maybe some setup for the next book, and that's really what it was. It was the resolution and a lot of setup, and I think some people just wanted more out of it than just that, and that's fine. If that's what you're looking forward to, that's fine. I've seen some people who said have heard that and thus are going to wait to read this one until close to the third one book's out. The setup definitely has me excited for the third one. They're definitely implying that we're going to be spending some time in a region of this world we had not yet, that I'm really excited to go see. Very excited for that. I do wish Ziala and Serapio had some on-page time together in this one, because I loved them together on page in the first one, and for reasons that are very reasonable because of the plot, they don't have that, but I really missed it, and so I'm really looking forward to the reunion, and yeah, I really like this one. I also think it helps that I must be the only Black Sun fan on the planet that likes Narampa. Like, she's not my favorite character, but I still liked her. I feel like everyone hates her, but I liked her. So that probably helps too, because like she's got a lot of chapters in this one, and we also had some new point of view chapters, and I enjoyed the addition of those as well. Next is my last reread of the month, actually my last one this time, and that is The Warrior Heir by Cinda Williams Chima. This is a YA fantasy series that I loved when I first picked these up over 10 years ago. Like, I think I picked this one up so long ago that the red dates aren't even on Goodreads, because I read it before I started a Goodreads, and that was a long time ago. But I never got around to the very last book in this series. There's 5 books, I've only read the first 4, and so I started rereading it so I could finish that series, and I enjoyed this on reread. This was a 5-star book for me initially. I loved it, and I did not quite love it as much. Again, this is just one of those books that I think, this book was definitely meant for teenage readers, and I think because, so when I read it initially as a teenager, I loved it, and as an adult, I liked it, but just didn't love it. It was one of those, I'm glad I read it as a teenager for the first time, because that was when I needed to have read it to have loved it, if any of that makes sense. So, one thing I thought was interesting about this is I think this is the first book I read that really makes it very obvious to me the difference and evolution in how YA books today are written versus when this came out, because I believe this came out in 2009, and it's just written very differently, and that's not a good or bad thing. It's just kind of an observation. This one felt like it was more obviously written towards teenagers, and not poorly written, just written towards teenagers. And I feel like the YA I've read more recently, that came out more recently, doesn't have that same writing feel. So this just has more of kind of like an older YA writing feel because of that. And I think when you hear people talk about how YA has started becoming older recently, this really just becomes evident to me in reading this older YA compared to newer ones. So, not a negative, it's a YA book, so I kind of expected to read a little younger, and I think I just kind of had forgotten that that's how they read, since I'd only been reading modern ones recently. But yeah, I enjoyed this. This takes place on Earth in a kind of like a Harry Potter style, where you have like wizards hidden among us kind of style. And in this one, there's wizards, but there's also warriors, enchanters. There's like a lot of different like sects of magic users, but wizards are kind of number one, and everyone's kind of treated as the second class by the wizards. And our main character was supposed to be born with a wizard stone inside of him, but he was not, and so in order to save his life, his aunt, who is a wizard, got another wizard surgeon to perform surgery to implant the stone, but she implanted a warrior stone instead, and so he ends up growing up to be a warrior. However, at the beginning of the book, he's unaware of any of this. He doesn't know wizards, anything exists. It's all been hidden from him. And this book kind of tracks his discovery of this, and then him training to be a warrior, and kind of where that culminates in this big kind of like warrior battle. There's like two factions of wizards that use warriors as champions to fight, and so it kind of culminates in that kind of fight. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm definitely looking forward to picking up the Wizard Heirs, the second one, and rereading that one. And the last book I read in April was Crown Duel by Sherwood Smith. This is one of my fantasy female classics, and so this was originally published as 2 books, Crown Duel and Court Duel, and it has since been republished as a single book. So like, this is not marketed as like a bind up of the 2. We are now publishing this as 1 book kind of thing. But because I knew it was 2 books, and because in the book it like very clearly marks when the second book starts, like it has like a big part 2 when you get there, I ended up like mentally, I have like 2 differing thoughts on book 1 and book 2, because like there are 2 distinctly different ratings. So book 1 was like a 3-star book for me, but book 2 was a 4-star book for me. So I'm going to kind of talk about them as 2 books right now. So the first one, the first half follows Malaria and her brother as they make a dying wish, or a wish to their dying father to overthrow the king, because he's a bad king. And so they kind of go off to spark this kind of homegrown grassroots revolution from their, where they live, their count and countess of their county. And they end up sparking this revolution against the king, and as they start fighting, Malaria gets captured. And so most of the book, just a single point of view, just following her, most of the book is just her captured and like running away and trying to escape and all that. And unfortunately, because it was single point of view, we only got that story, and because of the nature of her trying to run away, so she's like location hopping a bunch, we really only follow her character. Like, we don't really have any strong secondary characters for a lot of the middle of this book, for the bulk of this book. And I struggle with books that really only follow one character. Like, I need secondary characters. And so that one is why that one's more of a 3-star, because I was just struggling a little bit with that. And as well, there was stuff happening in the war, like alliances being made and stuff like that, that all happened while she wasn't there, so we didn't get to see any of it. And we'd like get back, she'd like meet up with the character and be like, oh, all this happened while you're gone. And I was like, but I want to see that happen. Like, that sounded interesting. So that's why the first half was just kind of a 3-star. The second half was better though, because in the second half it's much more court politics, and because she's just at court the whole time, we actually have secondary characters that we can get invested in and follow, and I really like that. There's a storyline too of, so she and her brother are trying to like fit in at court. They've never really been at court. They're kind of like wild child growing up, not like prim and proper countess and count as they maybe should have been raised or were expected to be. And so she's learning how to be at court, and I just kind of enjoy that as a general setting usually. And then in addition, she had the second storyline where she ended up trading like mysterious unknown letters with this guy at court, and they were like flirting and like kind of falling for each other through letter, and I just thought that was so cute. So the second half was like a solid 4-star. I am glad that they republished this as 1, because if I had only had the first one, probably wouldn't have gone and picked up the second. But since it was all in 1 book, and overall it's not super long, like this whole thing was like 450 pages, I finished part 1 and I was like, well, I'm gonna read part 2 because this is 1 book now, you know. So I'm glad I did that, because I would not have read book 2 if I hadn't done that, and I like that one. So this last book to round out my April reading. So if you're writing these books, tell me what you think. Let me know what you really liked when you read in April, and I'll see you in my next video.